This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Authority Supreme Herbicide from FMC. Stop weeds before they start with Authority Supreme Herbicide. This dual-action pre-emergent solution delivers extended control of tough grassy and broadleaf weeds in field peas, chickpeas, and soybeans. Apply pre-seed or up to 3 days after seeding. See your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Broadcasting today from Camrose, Alberta. Beautiful. I lived in Camrose for a year. I spoke to an audience of Cargill Market Sense customers last night. We had a fantastic time. Being the after-dinner speaker, It's a lot of fun. It's a little bit more of a lane to go and have some fun with the audience, and we had a great time. I'm going to be joining Cargill Market Sense and their customers yet in Brandon and in Grand Prairie yet coming up here in the next month or so. So looking forward to that. And, of course, next week, National Farm Machinery Show, Louisville, Kentucky, going to be there with Syngenta Canada and some of their customers. Looking forward to that. And the Galt Hotel is the home. Lyndsey's jealous, I know. I was jealous this week that she got to go to CattleCon in San Antonio. I'm going to be in Louisville next week at the Galt, which is the home base for the Kentucky Derby. That's the host hotel for the Kentucky Derby. Very cool hotel. And looking forward to that. Today on the show, we've got a RealAg Issues Panel, and we're going to have Tyler McCann of CAPI, Kelvin Heppner, and Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture. We're going to dig in on all the biggest issues of the week. A lot has happened. Monday seems like a long time ago, to be honest with you. And what's cool is that I think the majority of us were out on the road this week. So interacting with a lot of different people that are big fans of RealAgriculture. And speaking of that, it was awesome last night and in Cambridge with CCAN earlier this week. And at the Convergence Conference in Regina, being able to just talk to so many people in the RealAgriculture audience, and thank you so much. And some of you have a real passion for some of the content that we're creating, and you talked about how it's making a difference on your farm, just why you appreciate it, and some of the things that we do, being critical, some other things that we do as well. And I do appreciate that feedback indeed, and it was great to interact with all of you. Thank you so much for those interactions. Now, if you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Let's do something a little bit different. Let's bring in our panel here. In the opening, yes, here they come. Okay, what I didn't mention is the fact that our newsletters. Okay, so the newsletters that RealAgriculture does, because they only give us an hour here on Rural Radio. We've been doing a bonus segment, but there's other stuff too. And we send out a daily newsletter. We also send a weekly cattle email. Just imagine how jam-packed that cattle email is going to be on Monday after Lyndsey was in CattleCon all week in San Antonio, Texas. You can find out how to subscribe to that. It's free. It's free, and I know farmers love free stuff. RealAgriculture.com/subscribe. Let's bring in the panel. Speaking of Lyndsey Smith, she is back from San Antonio, Texas. Lyndsey, how was CattleCon?
Oh, wow. I don't know how to put it into one word. It was great. It was so good. San Antonio was beautiful. I really loved the reprieve from the cold. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to be home, but it was a lot of fun. So much. What a week to be there, though. Let me tell you. So Tuesday was sort of the kickoff, and that, of course, was the day after the trilateral meetings for our cattle industry members. And so, being able to have those conversations with, Nathan Finney and Dennis Laycraft right after all of that was just fantastic. And shout out to all my agriculture media friends. Got to meet some people for the first time in person, which was super cool. So that was great.
I'm going to be at Commodity Classic coming up here beginning of March. And honestly, like those big U.S. shows, one of my favorite things is to get to talk to other people in the ag media. right?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Great.
And it's not just like the talking about the issues and the friendships, but it's also being able to check out some of the gear. There's a lot of information sharing that happens in terms of how we all do our jobs and some of the latest trends and things like that to, bring all the content back to all of our respective audiences. Also joining us here is Kelvin Heppner, coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well, and looking forward to hearing more about all your excursions this week, all of you, as I held down the fort back at home. It's a decision you make when you have livestock, when you have poultry at home. You can't hit the road quite as often.
Well, and to be fair, Kelvin, last night I had a listener come up to me in the food line who is in poultry, and they were asking me questions about your poultry operation, and I just again was embarrassingly realized how little I know about bloody poultry. He was asking me all these questions, and I was just like, I got to text him. I don't know. Sorry.
You had 99.9% of the population.
Okay, I'm in the majority. Okay, well that's okay. I feel safe over there. But yeah, it was great. One of the things that he did say, he's like, "Don't you think you've been a little bit hard on supply management?" And I was like, well, we could talk about that. That's an interesting, that may come up today a little bit. Also joining us is Tyler McCann. He is the managing director at CAPI. Tyler, how are we doing?
Doing well, Shaun. Great to be with you. I had the opportunity to get to Winnipeg this week, not quite San Antonio, but was out talking to Keystone Ag producers at their annual meeting. Last fall, when we were trying to figure out what do we want to do some policy workshops on, we talked about trade and risk management. Those were the two kind of aligned with general work that we do. But boy, it's quite a time to be talking about those two topics in agriculture in Canada.
Yeah, no kidding. What was the mood at the CAPI, at the CAP meeting? At the CAP
event, yeah, I think a lot of uncertainty, right? Like a lot of people just trying to understand, what does this all mean? What is it going to mean for my business? Trying to navigate around kind of the signal and noise, to use that language around, what impact will this actually have on my farm business? And again, you get into this world where it's really different. I think we often think about agriculture as one big sector. You talked about how most of us don't know anything about poultry, but you get into a general farm organization meeting like that, where you've got, your canola farmers, you've got your SM farmers, you've got your beef or pork farmers. Those are all really different farmers that are going to experience very different impacts depending on what happens.
Yeah. No, what I've been at, just like agriculture is not homogeneous. Neither is it. The common question I've been getting this week is, how do Canadians feel about this? It's like, well, again, there's a lot of different opinions on what is going on here for sure. Hey, FP Genetics brings new seed genetics to Canadian farms, empowering growers to thrive in ever-changing conditions. Visit fpgenetics.ca to discover FP's dynamic portfolio of seed and to contact your local territory manager. Gain a genetic advantage and experience the next wave with FP Genetics. We're going to get rocking here with the Real Agriculture, RealAg Radio Issues Panel. After this very quick break, we'll be right back right after this. We're in St. John's, Newfoundland at the Newfoundland Federation of Agriculture meeting, Ag Industry Symposium 2025. We've got Shelley Woodworth with Cavendish Agri-Services, Dr. David Burton at Dalhousie. Shelley, we'll start with you. What's one piece of advice for improving nitrogen management?
Split applying. I think the days of putting all your nitrogen on up front, those days are gone with the new products that we have, with the weather events that we have. And I also think we need to advocate for ourselves a little bit better. Everyone here is doing a really good job, but the consumers and the people buying our food don't always know our story and how good you guys really are doing. So we need to find a better way to advocate a little bit better for ourselves.
David?
Only use what you need and use it in a way that it's most effective. So more is no longer better necessarily. Some cases it is, but some cases it isn't. Use what you need and use the kind of new tools like split application, enhanced efficiency products that will ensure that nitrogen is used most efficiently and gets the job done.
At Vaterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vaterstad, we look forward to growing together.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you by Alpine Liquid Fertilizers, your full-season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Looking forward to going to be down at Commodity Classic. Looking forward to seeing the entire team there from Nature's Alpine down there at the Classic. Lots of Canadians, I've heard, saying, hey, I'm going to see a Classic. I'm going to be there. A lot of them for multiple times, but as well for the first time. So if you do see me on the ground there, or Burn Tobin from our team, please make sure you stop us and say hello as a member of the Real Agriculture audience. Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. We got Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture. So Tyler, today, actually, you published a policy brief on the comings and goings of where we're at from a trade perspective. Give us the Coles notes, so to speak, not to age myself there too much, but give us the brief.
Yeah, so I think, Shaun, in part, this was driven by a bit of our discussion last week, where I think at the time we were trying to figure out what's going on in the United States. And we had heard at the beginning of the show that the tariffs would be paused. At the end of the show, it didn't look like it was going to happen. But I came away from that context, and luckily at the end of the day, we've had this 30-day reprieve, really thinking that the issue isn't whether or not these tariffs are going to come or not. You get into this whole idea, is it a negotiating buster or not? But what are the things that we can and should be doing in Canadian agriculture today to not only mitigate the potential impact of these tariffs, but to better put us on stronger footing for the future? And so what we want to do is really kickstart that conversation with a list of short, medium, and long-term actions that governments in particular, where this is the kind of the space that we think in, should be doing to better position the Canadian agriculture and agri-food sector for long-term success. Keep in mind a couple of really important facts. We are more concentrated in the U.S. market today than we've been in the last 20 years, right? Our efforts around trade diversification have failed. We face pretty serious competitiveness issues compared to U.S. sectors. Our food processing sector has actually done pretty well, and we are facing a trade surplus with the United States on food processing. All of that is at significant risk because of what's going on in the United States. And we may not be able to influence what President Trump does, but we can absolutely influence our own domestic policy, our own domestic landscape, and we can think about where do we go next. And so this is our attempt to really try and drive that conversation forward to say, here's a list of 15 actions, 5 short-term, 5 medium-term, 5 long-term actions that government should be taking and acting on to better position the sector. So we've got a 30-day reprieve, but we should be using these 30 days to think about the next 3 years.
I'm for those of you that are watching on YouTube, showing a graph of Canada-U.S. trade, and going back to 1990, and yeah, it's we've done a lot. Both countries continue to increase the business with each other. So it's not just Canada's become more reliant on U.S. trade, but honestly, the Americans see a lot of demand in our products, or a lot of need for our products as well. We can't forget that, Tyler.
Yeah, but Shaun, I want to do some really important reality checks, right? Exports are a far larger share of our production than they are in the United States, right? So we're an important market, but we're a much smaller market for them than they are for us. And we talk about these important relationships that we have. We talk about this. Yeah, it's true. The province of Ontario imports $17 billion worth of agriculture and agri-food products. That's 17 billion with a B. It's a big number. But the reciprocal state, those Ontario exports to the United States represent much more of Ontario agriculture than the $17 billion of imports represent on American agriculture. We really need to wrap our head around those dynamics and recognize that we are not negotiating from a strong position. The best thing that we can do is improve our domestic performance and better position ourselves for long-term success. And that's got to be, in part, success outside of the United States.
Yeah, and I think also, in if you look at the numbers, U.S. imports from Canada, there's a big gap between those imports and the exports to Canada. Okay, and so I think a lot of Canadians, they look at this, these numbers, and they say, look at the growth. When the Trump administration looks at these numbers, they say, look at the gap. That's the trade deficit. Now, this is one of the things that I've been saying this week in some of my speeches. This is the thing that that is not brought up enough in the U.S. is the fact that Canada is only a country of 40 million people spread out across the largest geographical or second largest geographical space in the world, and all of the people are across the pretty much for the most part right on the border. It is not a country of 400 million people. Canada basically has 4 U.S. major cities in it, like Calgary not being one of them.
But Shaun, if I can, this is where I think I'm starting to get pushing back more and more often on people. All that is a long list of excuses and context for reasons why we don't need to do anything different. And I think we need to stop talking about how we're smaller, different players. And we need to say, what are the concrete things that we can do to better position us?
Who said anything about not doing anything different?
So, okay.
Who said that? I didn't say that. I've been lecturing audiences across the country this week about how this should be a kick in the butt to actually do something. I'm the one that people have been saying have been too hard on Canada the past 3 months about how, being un-Canadian, because I keep on saying that we're the land of no action.
You're un-Canadian because you don't like syrup. So
that is true.
Let's all get this straight. I think the key point here too, and Tyler, in reading through the brief, I think, in a time where we're not in a position of strength, it's true. I really appreciate that, this is the action item, right? Because I'm someone who's like, okay, let's not wallow. Let's see what we should actually be doing and what we could actually take back as far as our own destiny, right? But at the same time, to Shaun's point, and unfortunately, I don't think it gets discussed enough, is that per capita number versus the giant number. Because when you actually look at the U.S. and so many of the U.S. markets, I know that eventually Trump would like to have in-house production of all these things, right? Of everything. If he could, have it his way, everything would get produced in the US. That is not the reality. And for some things we know it won't ever be the reality just because of geography, et cetera. But, I was at CattleCon this week. Every single, American representative that I spoke with, as much as, they're super positive about the industry as a whole and where things are going, and they're confident Canada and the US will work this out. They are very clear that the US needs Canadian cattle. And that's just one of the industries that the US actually depends on. So the unfortunate part is, I just think Shaun, to your point, that number discussion, even if we made it on a per capita basis, that ship has sailed as far as the communication point with at least the powers that be, I think, in the U.S. It's still important. I think that maybe we'll see more of it, but facts don't matter as much as they should, but action does. We just have to figure out which one of these or others we actually take.
So I'm going to take my turn to push back on Lyndsey now. It's one thing to say that they need Canadian
Tyler's
cattle.
uninvited. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
This will be my second week in a row, but last for a long time.
Last for a long time. Just kidding.
So it's one thing for them to say they need Canadian cattle or they need Canadian potash, but we cannot turn Canada into a country of hewers of wood and drawers of water, right? We cannot say we're just going to give up on the fact that it's not just Canadian cattle. We have a trade surplus on processed beef in this country. Our slaughterhouses, especially those two big ones in Alberta, exist because they're able to export beef to the United States, and we export more beef to the United States than we import back from them. Again, you go across kind of the list of goods, and we've got a fairly strong food manufacturing sector, a sector that's struggled, but that is growing and thriving. And the question is, do we want to protect that food processing sector, or do we just want to become exporters of live cattle and potash? And I'm not sure being exporters of live cattle and potash is in the long-term interests of Canadian agriculture and agri-food.
So what would you suggest we do with the potash?
Wait, Kelvin?
Hang
on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to ask what's best for protecting that food production that we have in Canada, Tyler? Is it diversification markets, or is it a closer economic relationship with the U.S.?
So I think the closer economic relationship with the United States over the last 30 years has really been the source of a lot of that growth. Let's be really clear. We have survived. That's the reason why we're more concentrated today before. It's such an easy market to access that it really has positioned us. But that's because that was reliable market access. We talk about this a lot in the context with China, right? Where we do not have reliable market access. That has been a struggle, and that is a huge issue. It's hard to imagine, but we can no longer consider market access to the United States reliable market access. So in the face of that, we need to look at what these other options are. I mean, part of it is trade diversification, but we need to understand the limits around trade diversification. We have supply chain issues already. So we need to think about what can we actually move to other ports? What can we process here? How can we add more value here so we're exporting something different? Part of it is about the business environment. How can we make it easier for businesses to compete, invest, and grow? How do we look at what the income tax incentives are, or the corporate tax incentives are, to invest in new equipment here in Canada and better position us for success in the United States? So
here's the reality, though, Tyler. I agree with all of that, But there's a great story in the Globe today about how the chilly investment environment in Canada because of the fear of this. And it's about losing the U.S. market or that U.S. market not being reliable. If Canada does not have a reliable, somewhat, more reliable than we feel today, if we don't have that reliable access to the U.S. market, I think you're going to have a hard time convincing a company, like, don't worry, we're going to diversify the market opportunities in the long term. We're going to make this all work out. Just we can't really trust the largest economy in the world to the below us to actually sustain your business. Those companies are going to say, forget Canada. I'm going to the U.S. because I can at least market to the largest economy in the world.
But that's right, Shaun. And that is an existential threat for the Canadian economy. Let's be really clear, right? Like, this is something that will shake us to the bones and potentially force us to kind of rewire everything that we do. But that's something that the Prime Minister, that business leaders, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the Finance Minister, the Public Safety Minister are all worried about. What I'm saying is that there are things that the Agriculture Minister and his counterparts across the country and ag leaders can do inside the ag portfolio to make a difference. And too often we get too caught up in these big things and we miss the opportunity to have an impact on the things that are within our control, that are squarely things that we can change and do and survive. So I don't disagree with all of those things being really true. What my point is, let's focus on the things that we can where we can have an impact and the actions that we can take.
And maybe we should talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. But first, the Canadian Crops Convention is heading to Edmonton this year from March 4th to the 6th. I'm going to be there. I'm looking forward to it. I'm hosting a panel with some Canadian stakeholders, American and Mexican stakeholders, talking about navigating our future. And it includes a fantastic lineup of knowledgeable speakers at the convention and great networking opportunities. Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister of Canada, is going to be there. That's going to be pretty cool. Paul Wells, I think, is speaking. So check out what the Canola Council of Canada and the Canada Grains Council have planned and register at canadiancrops.ca. Okay, let's take a break. We'll be back with more of the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anval Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated, but did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agrimart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. This segment's brought to you by Blackhawk EVO. From New Farm, Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn-down herbicides powered by Duplasin technology. Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. You can find out more by going to newfarm.ca. And Lyndsey, I know this. Taking control of those weeds early is critical.
Indeed it is. Actually, we'll be talking about weed control on Monday's Agronomist, so check it out.
Well, there was. Yeah. Ooh, nice. That's a nice segue by me. Who's on the show? What's going
on? Dr. Joe Eichley of NDSU.
Oh, I was with Joe. I like Joe. He's a good guy.
Yeah, and Rachel Evans of FMC. We're going to talk about herbicide layering. We're going to talk about fall weed control, spring weed control, in-crop, residuals, layers, like an onion.
Well,
anyway, that's Monday's show.
10-time national champion, NDSU Bison. Joe's from. So I heard this week that you were talking some college basketball and football with some of the guests you interviewed.
I did not. I just mentioned them because, you see, Shaun told me which people like which teams. And all you do is you mention it once and their face just lights up.
Yep.
But of course, from there, I know nothing. I know the name of the team and that's it. Anyway, it was a great time.
Yeah. Well, Lance Zimmerman's K-State Wildcats beat the ASU Sun Devils in basketball on Tuesday. So I'm glad I wasn't in San Antonio because he would have been just rubbing it in. Mm-hmm. So I avoided all of that.
None of that happened to me. Carry on.
Kelvin, we were talking about what Canada needs to do. Okay, so let's just park what we were just chatting about for a second. Let's talk about action steps, because this is the land of talk and no action. We got a big summit happening. I think it's in Ottawa. Prime Minister is there with a whole bunch of other people. They didn't invite us. Well, what's up with that? And we're going to talk. What needs to be the action part of this?
Well, that is part of it, and we're also seeing it with the ag ministers today. Federal Ag Minister Lawrence MacAulay has called a virtual meeting with all the federal, provincial, and territorial ag ministers from across the country. So they're going to be talking about Canada-U.S. trade and internal trade barriers and things like that today as well. So curious what will come out of it. Part of it is realizing the urgency here and coming up with these ideas like CAPI, like Tyler and the team at CAPI have done here in terms of a list of action items that can be done immediately, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and moving ahead on those files. So, yeah, I think that is this list. Tyler can expand on it, but there's a lot of practical, important things on here, such as potentially looking at cash advances and Farm Credit Canada's role in offering loan guarantees in the event of tariffs in the short term. You could look at agri-marketing funding. You could look at eliminating the carbon tax. That's, of course, something there's been pressure and discussion about for a long time. Prioritize food processing, regulatory relief. That's just some of the short-term things that Tyler and his team at CAPI have come up with here. So, yeah, there are practical things. There's a lot of talk about reducing internal trade barriers. That involves the potentially affects supply management, and that's something where I don't think people realize how difficult that would be to do.
Well, last week we that whole idea was poo-pooed by Tyler. He was negative Nelly about all of the interprovincial trade barriers. One of the ones that I think, Tyler, should be on your list is possible help with Canadian companies in current contracts. If tariffs are implemented, assistance with legal fees to try to battle contract issues in terms of who's going to pay the tariff. I think that's some short-term help that maybe should be talked about a little bit more.
I want to go back. It's an interesting idea. And again, I think we really kind of the first thing that we lead off with is we need to support the impacted businesses. And kind of there's this broader issue around not every business is going to be the same. You need to kind of figure out how can you do targeted, effective support that gets to those that need it for the things that they need it. And that's where one of the things on our list is the Deputy Minister of Agriculture should convene a working group with food processors to look at what are the specific challenges that they're facing that are unique to food processors, where you could get into solutions like that. I think that is something where we need that high level engagement that can actually drive relief. And it's not that I don't think that internal trade issues are important. It's that I think people significantly underestimate how complicated they are in the agriculture context and how difficult they are. So our recommendation on internal trade barriers is at the July FBT ministers meeting, those ministers should release and start acting on an action plan to remove them. So yes, address internal trade barriers, but this is not something. Saw that our federal internal trade minister, Anand, refer to this. We could do this in 30 days. I don't believe in the agriculture context that that's a 30-day action point. But by July, if ministers today on that call that Kelvin said that they're having commit to serious action on internal trade, they should be able to direct their officials to come up with a plan. That plan should be able to be released and they should be acting on it by July. But they need to be serious about it. And again, I worry what we're going to see at the end of the day is a press release that says we're all in this together, we're all committed to a Team Canada approach, and misses the opportunity to list those really specific detailed actions that they can take.
That'd be the Canadian way of doing it.
I'd also like to see detailed inventory of what these internal trade barriers actually are, and then go through them. Like, this could easily be done. This could easily be done. Well, this one's really tough. Let's put this, like, like let's see some more information instead of just modeling and estimates as to what this internal trade barrier cost actually is. To me, that idea needs to be developed and hashed out a little bit better before, like, we love to talk about, we need to break down and we saw Pierre Poilievre come out with a video and campaign this week talking about finding this new customer for Canadian products. Oh, it happens to be Canada. And how do we don't understand this problem well enough to me to actually make progress on the low-hanging fruit at this
That was
point.
Good sarcasm, though. I like that. That video was well done. I like the sarcasm.
But keep in mind, he offers a concrete solution in that video, right? Like, he talks about trucking as low-hanging fruit of things that we can act on. And so I guess, you know, and again, I'm acknowledged that I'm a former Conservative staffer, not involved anymore, but, you know, take this, when I say this, he gets a lot of flack for speaking in sound bites, but he does often offer pretty detailed solutions at the end of the day. So he should get more credit for that than I think he does.
Lyndsey, what are your thoughts?
There's also the idea of what is Canada. Canada is originally a confederation of provinces. When it comes to these trade wars, though, then we come together as a country, and so that's a discussion that needs to happen as to what's the role of provinces, how much power should provinces have versus what the national government should have. It's the same discussion that happens in the U.S. when we talk about Prop 12 and different state initiatives as well. How much power should lie with the provinces? How much should lie with the federal government? And any major effort to change internal trade is going to involve shifting power from the provinces to the federal level.
Well, and hopefully I didn't miss it. So, but here, I would like to know, you know, Danielle Smith talks about how we need to build Energy East, and she is looked upon as an opportunistic Western politician being divisive and not a part of Team Canada. Yet the Premier of Quebec this week says Energy East never happening. Not a word. Not a word.
I disagree, Shaun. I think that there is quite a bit of pushback on that. We've seen some polling that shows the majority of Quebecers support that deal going ahead. So I think
polling.
If you look at what the discussion and the discourse is happening, I think you're starting to see that more pushback on this idea that there isn't societal acceptance of it.
Some things like that changed this last week with the threat. Yeah. That's one of the there were positions that moved in terms of people.
Bloody hope so. Okay, hold on, Lyndsey. Wow, that's the quietest I've ever heard you be.
You know what? I am really enjoying this because, this is a great panel. I'm just taking it all in.
When we come back, we're going to Lyndsey first, and we're going to talk about, is Mark Carney the best person negotiated with the Americans? I didn't say that, but a poll out says Canadians maybe believe that. Hey, for every acre, every row, every seed, precision wins every time. Only Seedmaster delivers unmatched accuracy for better yields and bigger profits. See Seedmaster, driven by precision, leading the way in seeding innovation. I actually ran into the Seedmaster CEO this week at a Convergence conference in Regina. Had a nice chat with him. We'll be right back right after this.
Co-op knows your community because we live here too. Our teams are your trusted partners with a range of expertise to help support your entire farm operation. And we're giving back. In the past 5 years, Co-op has invested over $1.1 billion in the prairies through building, upgrading, and expanding local facilities. And we've returned over $1.17 billion to Co-op members in the prairies. Co-op, we're all building something for the future. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm. Calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers, are you looking for a profitable addition to your farm that can deliver value beyond yield? The new Seed Omega-3 canola production system can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities and an active God clause. Contracts include first-in-class agronomy support and free on-farm pickup after harvest. Contracts are available now. Commit early to maximize your opportunity. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com.
You know, we're having a lot of fun today. There's so much news. You got to be a little bit lighthearted at times and laugh things off a little bit too. We really appreciate everybody always making RealAg Radio a part of your workday, as I say at the beginning of the show, and really choosing to listen to us here on a daily basis and read the content that we're producing on RealAgriculture.com. It is a passion that we have to try to unwrap all of this because there's a lot of noise. And we really appreciate you trusting us with as an information resource very much. Hey, time is running out to register for the 2025 Crop Connect Conference. Join the industry February 12th and 13th next week at the Victoria Inn and Convention Center in Winnipeg for insightful speakers, crop-specific information, networking, and more. Register today at cropconnectconference.ca, and hey, stay for Valentine's Day with your sweetheart at the Victoria Inn there. Why not? Kelvin Heppner will be on location. Yes, you got to stay home.
Jay and I.
Yeah, you got to stay home this week. What about next week?
On Valentine's Day. Yeah. We really love each other.
We'll be at Crop Connect. In the networking room, we're going to set up a bit of a studio and be doing interviews there, providing coverage.
Fun.
Cool.
Man, I love this time of the year. It's taxing and requires a lot of monsters, but it is really such a rewarding time of the year out on the road. Okay, now I did sort of tease this a little bit. We have a new poll that is out, and Canadians believe that Carney is the best man for the job when it comes to negotiating with U.S. President Trump. So the poll conducted by the Globe and Mail and CTV News by Nanos Research between January 31st and February 3rd, that's right in the heat of all this, they found that 39.6% of Canadians surveyed considered Mr. Carney the frontrunner for the Liberal leadership as the most qualified leader to negotiate with Mr. Trump and his administration. 26% of Canadians consider Mr. Poilievre. So 39.6% for Carney, 26% for Poilievre. Lyndsey, what you say about that?
Okay, so I'm surprised that the numbers are that sort of far apart, but I'm not entirely surprised potentially that Carney maybe has the edge. I think there's a lot to unpack on this one. What does this mean for the Conservative Party and their, their focus for the next little while? So let's back up a step. When we talk about negotiating with Trump and the goalposts moving, and Trump says it's all about the border. And I've heard analysis, right? You just, if there's something on the table, you take it off the table. So if the border is the issue, you fix the border problem, you take the border off the table, you get on to the next problem. I look at this next election, and the Conservatives have made it the carbon tax election. That's what they've been calling it. Well, the Liberals are essentially taking the carbon tax off the table, and they're going to have to pivot here to really making this about who goes up against Trump and how. And they're going to have to position Poilievre as that strongest candidate to do it. And so far, they've got their work cut out for them because according to Canadians, they don't necessarily see Poilievre as the best to go against Trump. Now, I'd love to know what the argument is. I'm staying neutral on this one for now. I haven't really thought about it that much. But what I will say is this election has rapidly changed from cost of living, affordability crisis, carbon tax, to Canada's U.S. relationship.
Yeah, no,
that's right. Full on what it has become. And the Conservatives had this next election in hand if it had been an affordability carbon tax election. It no longer is. So what does this look like for this really by May?
Well, I'll say this. When I saw this poll this morning, it kind of brought a bit of a smile to my face because I thought I was floating a bit of a crazy scenario in my speeches this week to audiences in terms of if I'm Carney, I win the Liberal leadership, I cut a deal with the NDP that, hey, I'm the best person to do the negotiating, and I buy myself till October. I agree to an early renegotiation of the USMCA. I wrap that up by October, and boom, we have a new election in October and maybe a possibly much closer race. I will tell you this. I don't believe that, I'm just floating that, and I get a reaction from the audiences this week. It's pretty vile. People are like, you've got to be kidding me. What? People very, very upset about that. Kelvin, sorry, go ahead, Lyndsey.
Just quickly before you go to Kelvin, to that point, this week changed a lot of things. The last week to 10 days has changed so much. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting, though, that they would be comfortable with the same group that got us here over the last 10 years, because all of the MPs that were in the Trudeau, the majority of them have gone with Carney. We've got amnesia about that? I don't know. Kelvin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in the throngs of this leadership race, there's so much focus on that person on top that we're forgetting, and I think a lot of Canadians in general potentially those responding to this poll are forgetting, the entire team would be the same behind him as what we've had the last 9 years. So it's not, it wouldn't be as much change as what it feels like right in the middle of this election race. Lyndsey talked about taking things off the table. We've seen the Liberals, the leadership frontrunners, both Chrystia Freeland and Carney, take a bunch of things off the table and actually move in terms of direction real close to the Conservatives and what the Conservatives' policies have been for the last number of years in opposition when it comes to the capital gains tax changes, removing that. When it comes to carbon tax, taking that. Although Carney has replacement ideas there that may have the same effect as what the carbon tax has had or would have had. We've just seen in many ways, we saw Freeland talk about bringing Canada's NATO spending within the promised commitments within 2 years, which is a hard to believe timeline compared to what we've been hearing from the government talking about the 2030s for meeting that commitment. So we're seeing these things being taken off the table, and the Liberal ship is sharply turning towards closer to what the Conservatives have been talking about for the last number of years, which again is providing a challenge to Poilievre. And you sure wonder this may end up being a fight this next election, not a landslide like it was looking for the last number of months.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tyler, what do you think about this? If I'm Pierre Poilievre, I am looking to cut a deal with the NDP as quickly as possible so that they ensure the government falls when prorogue ends. Do you think they'll do that?
No, I don't think that they need to, because I think if the NDP cuts a deal with anybody, it's probably going to be the end of the NDP. I've had a hard time figuring out what's driving Jagmeet Singh's thinking, but any increase of the Liberals in the polls is coming at the expense of the NDP today. And if they let Carney stay into power, those candidates might as well not put out any election sign or any lawn signs in the next election. I cannot understand that. But it is clear. There's a story in the Hill Times this morning that on the 15th of February, Poilievre's got a major rally in Ottawa where they're going to launch a new vision kind of or mantra for the campaign. And it sounds like they're pivoting to lean into Canada first. And I think that you're going to see a kind of a more aggressive tone around that and kind of Canadian industries and Canadian businesses. And that's where I think that Mark Carney may be seen as the best person to negotiate with Trump. But Kelvin alluded to his carbon tax plan. I think it's a really good example of these guys think they're going to be too cute by half. They're going to say, no, we're going to take it away from consumers, but we're going to make businesses pay more. I think people understand that anything you make businesses pay for are going to get passed on to consumers too at the end of the day. So I don't think that Carney's going to be able to get away with that rebrand, let alone the fact this was alluded to. The people that are backing him in his campaign are all Team Trudeau. And so it's really hard to understand where that goes next.
Okay, let's talk about the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. We're going to be putting out the results here, a story up at realagriculture.com and realagristudies.com. Curious, what we've seen is a continued negative when it comes to the current farm financial performance at 83 out of 200, below that 100 neutral line. Future is basically equal. How is my farm business going to proceed financially 12 months from now compared to today? It's an 81. Significant drop off. Lyndsey kind of hinted at this last week in terms of is this a good time to invest? Lyndsey, I know you've been getting around talking to the audience as well as I have. There's a lot of concern about profit outside of the beef sector. Right. There's a lot of concern about profitability.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, on the beef side too, I think Nathan Finney pointed out, president of CCA, this is a cycle and this is a time for the cattle industry that they've been waiting for and they intend to capitalize on it. It also means that cycles tend to rise and then fall, right? That's a cycle. So good times, enjoy it while it lasts. But the cattle sector is certainly one of those ones that does not want to see all this volatility and uncertainty between these trade relations, because a lot of the profitability in that sector hinges on that strong integration between. But at the same time, I think, and we're seeing this play out more in businesses as well. I think, we share some links ahead of recording this about different businesses that either are laying off staff, are perhaps shelving projects. So just the threat of tariffs and the unstable trading relationship with the U.S. is already impacting several different industries and sectors, because everyone's trying, of course, to manage that risk. Farmers, realistically, it's still uncertainty. And so we're definitely seeing, I think, a lot more negativity as far as land prices here in Ontario. Definitely some stagnation, not necessarily that continued growth. We're seeing land land is not changing hands nearly as quickly. Things are actually kind of sitting on the market in Ontario, so that's an indication. And of course, we'd love to see crop prices increase and input prices go down, but I mean that's a hope and a prayer. That's not necessarily what's happening. So definitely some stress out there and some negative sentiment, I would say, as reflected in the sentiment index for sure.
Yeah, Kelvin, what's your reaction? Well, one of the questions we ask is, in the next 12 months, will we have widespread good times or bad times in Canadian agriculture? Since we started this question in September of 22, the average score is 79. So it's been negative, but just kind of below neutral. In January of 2025 here, last month, it plummeted to 36 out of 200. What's your reaction to that?
I think everybody's buckling down, hunkering down, prepared for a potential trade war. We're for negative margins potentially in 2025 on the crop side of things with a lot of different crops. To me, it reflects what we're hearing, and certainly I believe this is the lowest we've seen since we started taking the sentiment index. So it's not a good place and not a good sign. Lyndsey talked about overall the chill on investment right now in Canada. I wanted to highlight here, we saw Stats Canada release jobs numbers today, and the narrative there is actually counter to all of this, which is interesting, because we saw employment jump 76,000 jobs today, or in the report released this morning, and the unemployment rate drop. I just wonder whether this is a short-term little blip or bubble that happened ahead of the tariff threat that Trump laid out already back in November, saying it would take effect in January. Now we're on thin ice, expecting it potentially at the beginning of March. I just wonder whether there was some rush in manufacturing to get stuff out the door, get those exports across the border, that type of thing. I think there was some of that happening, and I wonder if that's why our labor numbers today were better than expected in the face of all of this other negativity and expectations of a downturn and a recession, or a real recession that we see in the numbers as well in Canada.
Yeah, and Tyler, if that's true, if Kelvin's correct there, that means the trade deficit gets wider. That actually doesn't help our negotiating.
No, it certainly doesn't, but it looks like that probably would drop off pretty quick, and the uncertainty around the jobs number, you really get the sense that there's going to be a pretty massive correction here as that gets offset. Well, the thing that I have a hard time kind of wrapping my head around in those farmer sentiment index numbers is that people really seem to separate the performance of their farm from the overall ag economy, where they're relatively neutral about how their own business is going to do, but they're pretty negative about how the agriculture economy as a whole is going to do. And I don't know if that's a sense that, again, you're a beef farmer and you think, well, things are okay for me, but they're not so good for everyone else, or kind of how that plays out. Maybe some parts of the country think that they're better off than the others, but I have kind of a hard time separating, what somebody thinks their own farm is going to experience versus what someone thinks the overall ag economy is going to experience. And would be interesting to try and figure out how they get from very negative on one to not so negative on the other.
Yeah, next week we're going to share some of the deeper dive into who said what. How does the beef industry feel about things versus the rest of the population, or supply management versus non-supply managed, and really try to dig into some of that. That's it. There's so many numbers to go through, and these are the top level aggregate slides, but we're going to get into it next week as well here on the show and at RealAgriculture.com. Okay, Lyndsey, I know we got one more segment, but you got to take off. You got to leave.
I got to bounce, but thank you everyone. And head on over to RealAgriculture.com. We have so much coverage from CattleCon, and there's some really good stuff in there. And Shaun, hate to break it to you, but I actually did a lamb market report. So everybody, check that out.
Who allowed that? Who actually agreed to do that with you?
Rabobank.
Oh.
And I can't wait. Anyway, head on over and check it out.
Diversification in action, right? That's what it is.
That is exactly right. Thank you, Tyler.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio right after this.
I'm the kind of guy who enjoys his freedom. Sure, I have a wife, kids, and a mortgage. But now I have new on-deck herbicide for wheat and barley. Thanks to a unique combination of actives, it delivers both superior control of tough weeds like kochia and proactive resistance management with, listen to this, complete rotational freedom. You can't tie this wild stallion down. Spray for today, plan for tomorrow with new on-deck herbicide. Visit your retailer or Corteva.ca to learn more.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Hey, Vaterstad is partnering with Canadian farmers for outstanding emergence. Their line of tillage, seeding, and planting equipment offers solutions for all soil types, field conditions, and tillage practices. They're helping you maximize yield. To learn more and to find out more from your local dealer, visit vaterstad.com. Saw some of the Vaterstad people this week in Regina. Okay. I guess takeaways from this week. I want to kind of sum all this up. What are you looking for next week, Kelvin? What's kind of you're going to into Winnipeg for Crop Connect. What are some of the signals that you're looking for?
Well, I think, I'm curious where farmers, like we've talked about, and we're always trying to get the pulse on where farmers feel things are headed. And I'm looking forward to those conversations, talking about how people see themselves potentially being impacted or not impacted. I know there are still quite a few people in Canadian agriculture that think these tariffs may not happen. And I'm curious how many still hold that belief. One thing I'll be watching for outside of the country, though, I believe is it Wednesday, Tyler, that all the premiers are headed to Washington, D.C. next week? February 12th, I believe, whatever day that is on the calendar, is when the Council of the Federation, which is the organization of premiers from the provinces across the country, is headed to Washington, D.C. So I'm curious who they meet with, if they get to meet with any of the actual people inside of Trump's inner circle, and whether there's any progress that comes out of Doug Ford leading that delegation, who have really filled some of that leadership gap we're seeing with Parliament prorogued right now and and Prime Minister in lame duck mode right now. Yeah,
I think that's really for any group that's going down to D.C., who are they meeting with? And is it like busy work looking like, hey, Team Canada doing our thing, spreading the good word, but are you actually meeting with somebody that has influence in regards to trade and the president? Because I think we mentioned this last week, Kelvin. You brought this up. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly meeting with Senator Kane on the Democrat side of the aisle. What the heck that's a waste of time. It looks good on the Instagram photo, but and there's lots that have done this, not just her. I think, Tyler, this is one of the big questions in Team Canada 2.0 in the second Trump administration, who you actually meet with, because it may not be the person you met with in the first administration.
And I think it's important to understand that in a world where there's so few people that are actually making decisions, I'm not sure that sending everyone down all of the time is always the right use of our resources either. And I think that there is this issue where we have this Canadian temptation that the best way to fix these problems are we're just going to run down to Washington and we're going to remind everybody how important we are. And of course, it is good to highlight those relationships. But those people that are still at home should have their sleeves rolled up and acting. And so that's why I'm looking forward to see what strong actions our ag minister is going to commit to coming out of this. And when do we start to see results come out of it next week? And like there are things that, in my mind, it should be, where's that extra agri marketing funding for our associations to really put meaningful effort into this? You do not need to wait for tariffs to come to take a proactive measure like that. Where's Macaulay's strong commitment to the political and technical resources needed to resolve market access barriers somewhere else? These are things that they could be doing anyways. They do not need to wait for a trade war, and it would be good to see some of that domestic leadership at the same time.
Okay. We're running out of time here on Rural Radio 147. We're going to continue the conversation, the three of us, in the bonus segment, the exclusive content that comes on the RealAg Radio podcast. So please download the podcast and tune in. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. See everybody next week at National Farm Machinery Show in Louisville, Kentucky. Say hi to Kelvin at Crop Connect, and thanks a lot for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Authority Supreme Herbicide from FMC. Give your crops the 2-in-1 protection they deserve. Authority Supreme's dual modes of action attack weeds early, delivering effective resistant management and prolonged control during critical growth periods. Dominate the toughest weeds before they take hold. See your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com today.
Well, we are here for the bonus segment. Thanks a lot, everybody, for tuning in. You know, one of the things I did hear from the audience a lot this week is how much people are enjoying this. I actually got a bunch of I like when we get community building in terms of where people are like, hey, I would do this with it. I would do that with it. Why don't you do this? So a lot of great ideas from the audience. Awesome stuff. Really do appreciate it. And as I've been mentioning, our podcast downloads of this show are like we're really up in the past month. Really appreciate that very much, everybody. Tyler, one of the things I really committed an error at the end there of the show, and I need to be held accountable for it. We need to mention it. I did not mention that Tuesday is Canada Ag Day.
That's right, Shaun. And FCC's got its big event in Ottawa, probably the biggest ag event certainly in the biggest ag event in Ottawa. 600 people, something will be there. I'm really curious to see what the mood is going to be like there. It often is a day I find it a little frustrating at times because we all just talk about how great we are. It is this typical Canadian experience where we all come and pat ourselves on our back, when in my mind, we do need to spend a little bit more time, even on the good times, talking about all of the problems that we have and the solutions that are needed for it. But this year, I really hope that there's a lot more focus around what do we need to do differently to better protect, promote, and grow the sector, and not just to celebrate Canada.
Kelvin, have you picked up on this? Like Tyler has said the word protect a lot today. What's he up to here? Protect, protect, protect. Did you notice that, Kelvin?
Protect Ontario is a slogan for somebody's election campaign right now, I believe, as well, right?
No, I didn't notice that. I mean, that is. So I'm curious. So I'm actually curious. Which party is it? Before I maybe make some mistake.
I think it's the incumbent premier that has that on his sign on the.
Looks like he's going to win on the landslides. So I've got the majority of Ontario behind me on that one.
Yeah. That's one thing. Like, how do we hear much this week about Ford? Like, can he pull back the election call? Like, or does he need to?
I don't think he needs to, because I think he's going to kind of cruise to a pretty solid victory.
Like solid victory.
Yeah. But I guess, Shaun, it's interesting that you pick up on that. That was not kind of getting into protect on purpose, but I really think that we need to think more like we're under attack. And we have had this like core fundamental kind of plank of Canadian agriculture, this relatively open, reliable trade with the United States, is blowing up. And we need to, I think that we do need to be a bit in more of a war mentality. There was this kind of talk in the United States that this was not actually a trade war, that we, silly Canadians kind of mixing things up. But it was. And I think we need to be on a war footing as we think about our response back.
Yeah. I'll throw this to you. Okay. So we were joking, I think, during the commercial break about the 51st state, just how that goes over. I've been telling audiences this week, and I know that everyone doesn't agree with me, that the more that President Trump talks about the 51st state, the better it is for Canada from a domestic standpoint in the U.S. I think it helps our cause, because he didn't campaign on this. This is out and beyond what was talked about. I'm all for structural change, not for acquisition when it comes to our neighbor to the north. Tyler, am I simplifying that too much?
Well, no, I think that there's this, one of these kind of debates that people get into is any of this stuff new or not? Or should we not? We should have known that Trump was going to do this. But again, the 51st state language is definitely new. This is all stuff that's come after the election. I think the chaos is far beyond what people were speaking about. And I do think it's hard not to react, to take this all personally. I was presenting on a webinar hosted by our counterpart organization in the United States, the Farm Foundation. U.S. listeners, take the opportunity to support the Farm Foundation and the good work that they do. But talking about trade, and it's hard when you're talking about this to a U.S. audience, I think, not to take it a bit personally, to have to kind of reinforce how important, reliable of a partner we are. One of the things that I showed was subsidy levels for farmers in different types of countries. And it's amazing how similar Canada and the United States are. It's not like Canadian farmers have some crazy advantage that we're out screwing U.S. farmers over. That's just nonsense. But we seem to have forgotten all of that. And again, it's gone beyond that now that they want to take the country over. I don't know. I think it's just crazy, absurd.
Kelvin, you and I talk lots about this. I really feel the responsibility to try to, be the liaison, so to speak, to try to help because we got a lot of American listeners on Rural Radio, trying to help them understand Canada's position, but also at the same time, and more so in this skirmish, is trying to help Canadians better understand the American position, right? And that's difficult, but I really personally feel that if we can raise that bar on both sides, eventually we get to a good result here. But that may be me just thinking, maybe inhaling too much fairy dust.
I'd like to believe that's true, and I hope it is in the long run. But just the events of the last week again, there's a wound. What happened, like making the threat as real as it was earlier this week in terms of the 25% tariff potentially applying to Canadian exports across the board into the U.S. I think that leaves scars, and unfortunately, I think it makes it more difficult for the relationship to be on a good footing. There's lost trust. There's a sense of betrayal in terms of how a lot of Canadians are feeling right now, and so it's a difficult. The position of sitting on the fence in terms of Canada and U.S. relations isn't tenable in some cases, I would say, as much as it was before this all escalated here over the last number of weeks.
But don't you think that's so I'm not disagreeing with what you just said, but that's a very what we're seeing here is the cultures of the two countries unveil themselves. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's Canadians are all about the relationship in business, and the Americans are about let's get down to talking business. And so I think that's one of the things that Americans have had a hard time understanding is like, okay, you guys are upset. Like, why are you upset? Like we're negotiating. Here's what I found interesting, ironic, is I thought both the Prime Minister and Pierre Pierre Poilievre did a very good job in their addresses on Saturday and Sunday. Both did very well. Okay, very similar speeches. I would add. But both of them, when they said, I now want to talk to Americans. And what they did was they talked to Americans as if they're talking to Canadians, because they talked about the history of the relationship and how far it goes back and how we relied on each other and all those things. And I think they actually weren't talking to Americans. They were actually they put a Canadian filter on the American talk, and we still don't understand the cultural differences that exist. I don't know. That was my reaction.
I heard Oren Cass, he spoke with The Hub yesterday, a Canadian media outlet. Oren Cass is an up-and-coming influential economist in Trump and Republican circles. He recommended that Canadian businesses and Canadians don't have an emotional reaction to the threat of these tariffs yesterday. And I find that I agree generally, emotional reactions lead to poor decisions. And so I agree in general, it's not good to have an emotional reaction or make your decisions based off of emotions. But a 25% tariff, Americans have to realize, is a pretty existential threat to the Canadian economy and would increase our unemployment rate pretty significantly within a short to medium term. And so when people's jobs are at risk, when people's businesses and livelihoods are at risk, I think it's very difficult to realistically expect somebody to not have an emotional reaction.
Tyler, you want to get in here?
Yeah. So again, I'm really on kind of agree with Kelvin on it's hard not to have an emotional reaction, but to to go back to earlier discussion around action. So here's my question to you, Shaun. What do you think it takes to get Canadians to have more of that American-like reaction where we're going to say, okay, what are we actually going to do about it? How do we get up off our ass and actually get our butt in gear and actually change some things? So maybe we should take lessons from that American approach. And so what does it take, Shaun? What do we need to do?
If this doesn't make that happen, I don't know what will. Like, and I mean that in the most sincere, like, I think this is I do believe this is a Canadian cultural issue that goes back prior to Trump, like about, the competitiveness. Some of the people that I know that don't like Pierre Poilievre that are more conservative leaning don't like his talk about, like, they just don't like the way he talks when he talks about competitiveness. They're uncomfortable with as if there's a win-lose, like, and I think that kind of says something a little bit about us. And so if a president of the United States, the most powerful position in the world, is talking about annexing a country, serious or joking or whatever, and we're talking about 25% tariffs, and it is going to be the destructive force to ruin our economy, and businesses are going to leave, and we're full 10% on 15% unemployment, and how are we going to survive? If that doesn't motivate us to actually take action as a country to get our poop in a group, so to speak, what will? What does it actually, what needs to be the threat in order for us to take action? I don't know.
And I struggle with the fact that, I mean, it's good that our FPT ministers are meeting today, but it doesn't seem like they've met on these issues until now. Like, we're 1 week past the serious threat of this. And so, like, I don't know how different it would have been had the tariffs actually come into effect. But Shaun, like, we came very, very close to a disaster, and we haven't actually changed much yet. Again, we've hosted a couple of meetings. People are going to Washington, but I'm not seeing anything different at the end of the day. And so I worry that it's not enough of a signal, and I worry that we're going to be kind of coasting along, and we'll continue to meet and hold summits, and nothing's going to change.
Yeah. Kelvin, I wanted to get into the show and I didn't. Bunge, Viterra, there was news this week.
Yeah, Bunge had their year-end fourth quarter earnings call this week and report, and in that they gave a bit of an update on the acquisition of Viterra. And so we know the Canadian approval, government granted its approval with a bunch of conditions a couple of weeks ago. That was the big one, but they still have approval pending from Chinese authorities. And so they are expecting that to cross the finish line soon. But there were some questions asked on from some of the analysts on the call with the CEO, Gregory Heckman, about whether the U.S. tariffs now and the escalation of the trade war between China and the U.S. could potentially slow down that approval coming from the Chinese authorities. So it's something to watch. As certainly across Western Canada, this will be a big change as Viterra has a major presence, our second largest grain handler in Western Canada, potentially moving under the Bunge banner here in the coming months. And there's a lot of different investments, whether we talk about the crush plant at Regina or port infrastructure, grain elevators. Some of them have to change hands here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan as one of the conditions of the Canadian government. So certainly something we're following. And right now it looks like they are down to this Chinese approval, which is, I guess, certainly it's not a done deal by any means at this point.
Tyler, any stories that we didn't really cover that top of mind for you?
Well, I'm going to maybe take that last one around Bunge and Viterra and kind of merge it back to where we were before. And I think it's this kind of ongoing theme that one of the issues that makes us weak in all of this is that we don't have many Canadian companies left. And you can get into kind of all of these competitiveness issues and what the Bureau looks at and what it doesn't when it's approving these deals. But I think there's like a broader issue around we need some more Canadian leadership. So I think that's one thing that's there. We didn't talk about it. It was a big deal at the time. PMRA changed its decision on Lambda. There was this kind of odd decision, I think, at the time to say that you couldn't use it on a product that could be fed to livestock. 4 years later, PMRA's reversed its decision. And I think it just highlights the fact that the regulatory agencies in Canada don't work the way that they should. And better late than never, I guess, on a good decision.
Yet, you know, and it's funny. Like, and I'm not disagreeing that they need to. PMRA needs to be better. Like, absolutely. I want to make sure I make that very clear. But it's interesting when you talk to some people in the U.S. They're like, you know, EPA, just like it's so slow. Like, so it's just it's funny to hear all the different.
The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, except like we're worse than they are.
Oh yeah. Kelvin, go ahead.
We don't have the market size to motivate companies to go through all that red tape, whereas U.S. companies certainly have that motivation to do that. So,
well, and the other thing that I hear lots, you know, and through the winter different meetings is not only is there a lack of Canadian companies for Canadian leadership, but you know, more and more where there is a presence in Canada, it's a decentralized, where you know it's really a decision being made out of country, right?
Well, is that all negative though in terms of when we talk about some of this trade policy stuff, though, Tyler? I know Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary talked about the percentage, I forget the number he gave, but the percentage of Canada-U.S. trade that happens within private companies, under the same company banner. It's the U.S. Cargill, Canada Cargill kind of relationship, or other companies where things are actually under ownership of the same company, and that trade crosses the border. So to me, it could potentially be a bit of a safeguard or help Canada's argument if American companies are suffering from tariffs either way, whether it's retaliatory tariffs or the initial tariffs from the Trump administration.
That is up until they move those Canadian plants or businesses to the United States.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
We lose that safeguard, and I think that there's a broader issue. So I think about this in the context of the work we do at CAPI, where we're trying to go out and engage with Canadian companies on Canadian ag policy issues. And so many of the large businesses don't have that strong Canadian interest. And I look at the support that our counterparts in the United States get from ag businesses. It's just there's kind of a different set of dynamics there, but those businesses care more about the U.S. market than they do about the Canadian market. And yes, the Canadian market's smaller, but you notice a difference when you see Nutrien making decisions. That being that Canadian business, I think, has an impact and changes the priorities and how they act on things. Maple Leaf, as a Canadian business, acts differently than the large beef packers that are global companies. And again, it's hard to sometimes quantify this, but when I think about one of those underlying structural issues that I'm not sure how you fix, we haven't come up with an action to deal with this one. The lack of Canadian ownership is a structural issue that we need to figure out. And I actually think that part of the solution is we need to make it easier for small businesses to become medium-sized businesses and medium-sized businesses to become large businesses. And then we need to try and prevent those large businesses from being sold. But we don't have that same motivation and desire to grow that we might see south of the border.
Yeah, this is a big concern in the innovation space. So from an investment and innovation standpoint, that the lack of Canadian presence is a major concern.
Well, and the way you go from a small business to a medium business is expand into the U.S. traditionally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Bad news.
Yeah, but at the same time, we want to make sure the audience isn't left with the fact there's not a defeatist. These are the constraints. These are the barriers. These are the threats or the challenges that Canada has to sort of figure out and overcome. And our greatest weakness is also our greatest strength is in some ways our greatest weakness in the fact that we're the jealousy of many countries around the world. We're adjacent to the largest economy in the world.
But Shaun, that's not the weakness. The weakness is that we just take that and do nothing with it, right? The weakness is our comfort with the status quo, right? You could take advantage of that access to the United States and use it to our advantage and better position and leverage the industry for it, turn it into a competitive advantage that we've got. You can build off of that foundation, but we don't, right? Because you know what? Life's not so bad and, it is what it is. And we're just going to kind of sit on the porch and love life.
Hey, so in speeches this week, we have data, and we talked about this before on the show. 2 weeks before the U.S. election, who do you think is better for Canadian agriculture? Kamala Harris, Donald Trump. Okay, 70% said Trump. Now, when in the why and the open-ended responses, it's all about the economy. So, U.S. economy does well, Canadian economy will do well. That's a very traditional way of thinking. I understand that. The question was about Canadian agriculture, but they answered kind of overall economy. When you look at the 38% that said Kamala Harris, okay, they in their open-ended responses, the reason they chose Harris was because they believe that she values the relationship and she values free trade. And my point is to audiences, no, she doesn't. She's one of the 10 senators that voted against the USMCA in the first place. So I think we sort of have a misunderstanding of what has been happening in the U.S. on both sides of the aisle. We've been talking, and like not to say that we know everything here, but this is something we've been talking about. There's been protectionist sentiment rising on both sides of the aisle in the U.S., and I'm not sure that a lot of Canadians have really clued into that. They're still thinking U.S. politics from 10, 15 years ago, not here in 2025.
The problem is, Shaun, that Donald Trump and those in the administration today are so protectionist that it makes Kamala Harris look like a free trader. And that is, I think, the bizarre world that we live in, right? Like all of these things are relative. And she is she would have been far better for the trading relationship than Donald Trump ever would have been. So you can hang your hat on her USMCA vote, but I think if you look at actually what they were talking about doing, the approach they were going to take, far better for global trade than Donald Trump would be. I mean, he's lighting the whole thing on fire.
I know Kelvin disagrees with you, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm not putting words in your mouth, Kelvin. This has been sorry, Kelvin, go ahead. I'll get your thought on the record here.
I think what the Trump administration is doing here is trying to upset the apple cart, and I don't think the Democrats would have done it as severely. It would have been more of a boiling frog approach, maybe with the slow boil, but not
less rash.
And certainly this may draw more of a reaction from Canada and other trading partners if the Trump administration is playing this zero sum, we're going to punch you in the face kind of trading type type policy, it's certainly going to draw more reaction. So I'm not, it'll. Whereas the Democrats did it while pretending to be our friends, potentially, this is more in-your-face bullying.
Right.
Hit you and if you try.
23% said it didn't matter which side. It was this. It would be the same result. So I
just want to correct one thing Kelvin said. He didn't just upset the apple cart. He upset the apple cart, covered it in kerosene, lit the thing on fire, and then drove over the ashes at the end of it all. Like there's nothing left of the apple cart anymore. And I'm not sure that that's in anybody's interest.
They got to work fast. We have only, there's basically only 2 weeks to the midterms, or sorry, 2 years to the midterms. Okay, this is only the end of week 3, and they've got to move fast. I really won't be surprised March 1st or March 7th or whenever the deadline is going to be. Canada hasn't agreed to. We're renegotiating the USMCA. I think that is, and we had Michael Harvey from CAFT on the show earlier this week, and he said there's nothing wrong with that being an outcome because it potentially keeps the tariffs off, and we're talking, and talking is not bad. Talking is fine.
And negotiation, the talks around USMCA were supposed to start this year anyway. So what is it? It's another one of these things where sure Canada's going to agree to something that we actually had already promised or thought we were going to do that anyway. So.
Yeah, and that actually was on our list of actions, but we took it off because it's kind of broader than the ag portfolio. But I think relaunching those negotiations is important. But again, it doesn't seem like it's going to make a difference because they're just going to keep burning things down at the end of the day.
Maybe. We'll see.
Really succeeding at what Steve Bannon talks about flooding the zone in terms of signing all these executive orders and just having so many different moving parts happening at the same time. It's in the news business, there's no end to the amount of work right now in terms of trying to follow what's happening.
Yeah,
it's not just one apple cart that's on fire; it's 1,000 apple carts.
I believe could you imagine working for the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Politico, any of those like policy, politics kind of news organizations, and the person on the White House desk? You haven't slept for 3 weeks. You are literally exhausted. I could not imagine.
So, Shaun, one quick question. You brought up the 2-year deadline or 2-year timeline with midterms. What makes you think that things will change with the midterms?
Because history has shown us that the midterms will not be kind to the Republicans.
Okay.
So that's typically what happens. There is somewhat of a sway back. Typically in the midterms, Republican president, it would show opportunity more so at the midterms for the Democrats if they get their self-organized, and at this point maybe we should be doubtful about that.
Yeah, Shaun, how typical is it that in the first 3 weeks the president initiates trade wars with his closest allies, fires attorneys at the Department of Justice, dismantles international aid organizations? I mean, I don't think anything's typical anymore. And I worry a bit that we've got this Canadian optimism of, we'll just wait to the midterms and then all of this.
No, I'm not saying that. No. I'm saying that as I consider myself, I'm saying that as an informed person on what's going on politically in the U.S. I'm not being a naive Canadian on that. I think the Democrats have made a fundamental error because last weekend, Chuck Schumer, Senate leader of the Democrats, is talking about how we just got to wait for Trump to screw this up by the time the midterms come around. That's not the attitude you should have. I think Trump would see we need to act while we have the votes in place and get this new negotiated deal, get that approved before we risk the chance that things do change in the midterms at the congressional level.
You wait till they win more seats in 2 years.
Well, they could, but that's. I'm not saying that may not happen, but that's how they'll be thinking. They want to have that done by the midterms because you don't know past that what it sort of looks like, and the Democrats have really given no sign that they really fundamentally understand why they lost the election. They do not. I listen to enough U.S. political radio. They do not. It's lost on them.
And that's one thing that's interesting. I think that's different with the Liberals in Canada. Like they are, as much as Carney's crew is Trudeau's crew, Carney does seem to be running in a very different place than Trudeau did. And it does seem like they've pivoted and they've learned those lessons. And so I think that's where you get into the world where Kelvin and his fellow Liberals across the land, they are far more comfortable with the Mark Carney type and where they are than they were with Trudeau because they have pivoted and they are making that move and they are making that change.
Kelvin, you got to defend yourself. Well, you can't let him do that to you.
Got to cut the show off here.
You can't let him do that to you. He's just trying to bully you.
I'm sorry. I don't believe, again, we should learn from Donald Trump that bullying is not right to, now, for those of you who know, Kelvin is a good honorable member of the mainstream media, just like the rest of them. And I'm sure he's very nonpartisan and everything.
Okay, we're finishing off with this Super Bowl pick. Tyler, who you got?
Just so
you know, it's the Chiefs and the Eagles.
Oh
my Lord, how did you get onto this show?
I don't know. It was a mistake. I hear that ticket sales are down because everybody's bored with the Chiefs playing year after year after year.
Yep.
I'll pick the Eagles just because Taylor Swift's boyfriend's a loser or whatever that is.
Well, he's a pretty good tight end though. Maybe he was getting like, this is example of you at like the partisanship. He said, I'm excited to play in front of the President of the United States, any President of the United States, because President Trump's going to be the first president to ever go to the Super Bowl. And people are like, that should make him so he can't be the MVP. Like, people are nuts, like literally.
And again, the fact that Trump's going, he's going to be the first one, makes me think that I'm not clear that they're going to lose seats in the midterms. I mean, these guys are good at politics.
Well, he's in New Orleans, and it's a corporate crowd. Like, that's one thing about a Super Bowl, very corporate crowd. Kelvin, who you got?
I got the Eagles. I'm sure if the Chiefs might win, but I'll be cheering for Eagles. But Jason Kelsey's the better of the Kelsey brothers.
I do appreciate Jason Kelsey more. Jason Kelsey he's been moved on to Monday Night Football's pregame show and on ESPN. He does a really good job. I think Jason Kelsey is turned into a very good broadcaster very quickly. I'm right there with you.
I love the self-deprecating humor.
Yeah, and it is, and just the way his wife is actually kind of funny. Like, yeah, it's my wife loves listening to that. My wife's listening to a sports podcast that's really not about sports, but it's two sports people. It's very weird. Do you know that the biggest business right now is the wives of the football players? Like, they're actually in some cases as influencers making more money than the actual football player. Like, it is big family business. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. We got a little bit long there, an extra half hour. Sorry about that, but we are pretty passionate about these topics. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. I got the Eagles as well, everybody. Send me your predictions, your thoughts, or anything else we chatted about, and have yourselves a great weekend. Cheers.